So these are the best decks to climb with before the new expansion drops. And before I start, I just want to say two things. One, I would recommend you climb with these meta decks now so you can get to whatever your dream rank is, and then you can experiment with new decks when the new stuff comes out. And also, all these decks are really strong, so don't necessarily craft one if you have 0 of the cards. Craft whichever one is closest to you so you can save some dust and gold for the new cards when they come out. That being said, let's jump into it. The first one is Quest Warlock, which is honestly the strongest deck in the game in my opinion. It's a little bit harder to play than something like a Face deck or even Pirate Warrior, I would say. So from that standpoint, it might be a little bit more difficult, but it's a very flexible deck. You've got good removal, you've got a couple of different win conditions with the Flesh Giant potentially as a mid-game win condition. You can beat aggro decks with just insane amounts of healing, and you can beat slower decks with the crazy late game once you finish your quest. Not to mention a couple of other cards in here like a Netheron, Baron Scavenger, the Wind Fury, and Gold Shiny Knoll, which can just be really statted minions, well-statted minions that you can play for cheap. Overall, this is a very flexible deck that I think is extremely powerful. They got an early game removal with the new mini set with the Shadowblade Slinger, so that helped them out in the early game. And overall, it's just the strongest deck in the game in my opinion. But close behind is Quest Warrior. The reason why I put Quest Warrior a little bit behind is because Quest Warlock has this sense of inevitability. Once you finish your quest, you are going to lose. But with Quest Warrior, there's a little bit of RNG required. Once you get the Juggernaut, you might low roll a couple times in a row, which gives your opponent enough time to come back. Or if you're playing against a control deck, they might be able to gain enough armor or control the board enough to basically beat you. And yes, Warlock, you could aggro them down, but that's really the only way you have of beating them. With Quest Warrior, there are a couple of more things that can be done against you, but still overall, it's very strong. Win rate wise, they're both very close together. I would say that their difference is like 0.2% depending on what range you're looking at. So I'd say that they're basically the same. I just personally think Quest Warlock is a little bit stronger, but both are extremely strong. So the next deck on this list is Face Hunter, and you're probably surprised that it is this high on the list, but it is because of two main reasons. One, the deck is just probably one of the best matchups against the best deck in the game, in my opinion, being Quest Warlock, and the second best deck in the game being Quest Warrior. This deck is able to do direct damage from hand, so even if it loses control of the board, like against a Warlock, you could still finish them off with spells from hand, which they can't like really respond to. And you have really strong early game tempo with the Arcane Anomaly into Doggy Biscuit, into Ramming Mount, which is very hard for a Warlock to deal with unless they specifically have like the unstable Shadow Blast or whatever it's called. And then against Warrior, they don't gain that much armor, they're more of an aggressive deck, so if you just ignore their minions and go face and make them trade into you, you could potentially win the game with direct damage spells at the end, even before they finish their quest. And then the other thing is just that it's okay against everything else, right? If you get a really good hand with Face Hunter, and your opponent gets a bad hand, you're just going to snowball and win. And even the bad matchups like Libram Paladin are still winnable. Like, yes, they could get good ramp into or good mana reduction into an early Libram of Hope or two, but that's not always going to happen, whereas Face Hunter is always going to have that damage. It's consistently good, and if the opponent low rolls, you'll almost always win, and it has good matchups into the best decks in the game. So the next deck on this list is Quest Rogue, and Quest Rogue is on this list for two main reasons. One, similar to Face Hunter, it beats the two best decks in the game, Warrior and Warlock, pretty consistently, while also holding its own and doing pretty well against several of the other decks. And people realized this, at least on my channel, after I played it and went like 16-3 to Legend with it on like my final push not too long ago. And they were like, wait, this deck is really good, can you play it more often? And it was actually only after playing that I myself realized how good it was. Because I always thought it was decent, but then I played it and was like, this deck is insanely strong and fast early game. It actually has enough removal and minions to beat Face Hunters sometimes, which is extremely difficult to do as Rogue, but also good mid and late game, which is able to hold its own, if not beat, Quest Warriors and Warlocks if they don't have very specific removal to deal with a big stealthed minion or just any of your minions in general. Not to mention the fact that you have good direct damage with Wicked Stabs, SI Agent, and the gizmos that you get off the quest, most notably the 3-2 weapon. Also, dude, that flashbang where you get to bounce a card back to the opponent's hand for 1 mana, game breaking. These tempos, it's a 1 mana removal that gets rid of death rattles, basically. It gets rid of a taunt minion. It gets rid of giant pumps. Not to mention a potential free assassinate with a 4/4 body. extremely powerful early game and mid game. Late game, also strong, but it falls off a little bit because it doesn't have as many late game tools as like a Quest Warlock, but still very strong. Hopefully you guys enjoy this deck. I like it a lot. Let's jump into the next one. So the next one is Libram Paladin, and I hope that by making it 5th, you guys don't think that it's bad, because even though it's 5th, in my opinion, it's still extremely strong. Like, the win rate difference, according to Hearthstone Replay, between this and, like, Quest Warlock is maybe at most a percent, and it really depends on what rank, like, distribution you're looking at. In a lot of ways, or in a lot of cases, this deck is only, like, 0.5 to 1% behind, which is basically nothing. This deck is a 53% win rate deck on Hearthstone Replay. You will climb. Okay, so why is this deck so good? Well, you got some decent early game tempo with a couple of 1-drops, some 2-drops, some pumps, a 3-drop that pumps up your hand and draws you a minion, but it really hits its stride in the mid game. Once you hit the mid game with this deck, if you're not like about to lose, you are going to win. You will have reduced cost spells, whether it be from Carrier Rome or any of the Elders. You will have a really good removal with Libram of Justice, 2 copies, and Barov, along with Animated Broomstick or City Tax, or even, what's-his-face, Blademaster Samuro. And then you have potentially infinite value with Lady Liadrin. Varian is a really big win condition, as well as something that gives you 3 potential cards. Librams of Hope, which again you can get more copies of with Lady Liadrin. It's just so good after turn 6. With being pretty decent from turns like 1 to 5 as well, because Carrier Rome, Elder Truthseeker, and the Elder Attendants are all very efficient, good cards at their mana cost. So overall, it's a very good deck. I would highly recommend playing it if you have Paladin cards. And let's jump into the last one. So the last deck on this list, other than the honorable mention that I will get into in a second, is Aggro Druid. And Aggro Druid is a weird case because it has the 3rd highest win rate in the game according to Hearthstone Replay, behind Warlock and Warrior. But if you know what you're doing against an Aggro Druid, I feel like it's very easy to play around. Obviously, sometimes they'll get the nuts and you'll still just lose and it's not great. But if you know what you're doing, bad matchups can all of a sudden become good matchups. Like, I played Face Hunter 150 times over the last season and a half, up until the nerf for Aggro Druid came out, and then I haven't played Face Hunter since then, weirdly enough. And my win rate against Aggro Druid was above 50%. And it's because I realized, hey, the Razormane Battle Guard is extremely powerful, so I will actually kill it with things like Quick Shot, or I will use even an aim shot on it and give up a turn to kill it because it could potentially stall out and allow me to do more damage in the future, as well as knowing that, hey, I can trade into his minions because Druid literally can't do anything if it doesn't have a board. It can't play Composting, it can't pump up with Arbor Up, it can't really play Greybow, which means that if you control the board super hard, you'll win more, right? Like, I also do really well against this deck with Quest Warrior because I focus more on trading and then waiting for the eventual infinite value. Same with Face Hunter. I control the board and then eventually wait for my good direct damage with Trampling Rhinos, Piercing Shots, Direct Spells, Hero Power, all that jazz. And because of the fact that this deck is easy to counterplay, I think that it is now 6th. Even though the win rate's high, because if they don't know what they're doing, and they probably won't up until Diamond 5, so this deck is obviously going to be very strong up until Diamond 5. If they don't know what they're doing, this deck will dominate, and it'll be the 3rd highest win rate deck in the game, no problem. And that's just my own personal opinion on it, and based on my experience playing against this deck and as this deck once I got to Legend. But again, it's cheap, it's still strong, you will be able to climb, it's not a bad deck, it's just my own personal opinion. So the last deck on this list is Evolv Shaman. And Evolv Shaman is one that I went 22-7 with last season, and it's honestly just so good. So there are a couple of things about this deck. One, it's extremely cheap. The only legendary it uses is Instructor Fireheart, but if you don't have her because she's a legendary, you can take her out and run a Venomous Scorpion. Like, yes, you lose some potential snowball, but you still get to generate at least 1 spell, as opposed to maybe like 3 off of Instructor Fireheart, which is kind of a big deal, but it's not huge. And then you also have really sudden boards. You have Revolve with Lightning Bloom and Tiny Toys on turn 5, which can get rid of pumps against multiple decks while also getting you a board of 5/5s. Turn 5, you can play Knuckles into turn 6 and get a board of 6 drops, which is extremely powerful. And it actually also does pretty well against Warrior and Warlock. If you don't have Tiny Toys, the big issue with this deck is if you don't get Tiny Toys, you're kind of a sitting duck, so it heavily relies on 1 card. Actually 2 with Bogs by Knuckles as well. Revolve is adequate if you have Tiny Toys and no Bogs by Knuckles. Anyway, sorry. the deck does have one glaring weakness. No tiny toys, you're kind of doomed. But if you mulligan for it and keep it in your hand most of the time, as long as you have at least 1 or 2 cards early game to make sure you can survive a little while, the deck is going to perform well. Play this turn 6, get a whole thing of 6 drops. As long as you get a taunt against an aggro deck, you win. Not to mention the fact that you have Tidal Surge and Canal Slogger to keep yourself alive into aggro decks. This is basically 20 HP of healing in just these cards. Not to mention cards you discover off of the Importer, Guidance, Instructed Fireheart, or the Venomous Scorpion. I really like this deck. I think it's my favorite deck of the expansion so far that's actually good. I'd say like Evolv Shaman might be a little bit more of my favorite, but it's not as good as Evolv Shaman. So if you want a really fun deck with a good amount of RNG that isn't game breaking but still fun and also a good deck to climb with, I would say Evolv Shaman's the deck for you. That is it. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.